is projecting. And we have also been quite lucky to be able to develop modern contraceptive methods which were effective, safe, and cheap. If developing hormonal contraceptive and other contraceptive device had been as hard as finding a vaccine against malaria or against HIV, then the fertility transition would have taken probably much longer with numerous ecological consequences. Next slide. Again, my overall impression is that the human species has been very lucky so far with respect to the population problem. Europeans and North Americans paved the way for population control by choosing low fertility on their own, and when given the choice, couples all over the world choose to have a fertility near or below net reproduction. And this seems to be true everywhere and largely independent from culture and religion. And when I started my studies about 30 years ago, this was not at all obvious. I mean, people didn't know what will happen, in particular in Africa. Even the countries considered the most conservative also have now good family planning programs, as for instance, Iran or Pakistan. In most countries and in virtually all urban areas in the world, fertility is declining very quickly. This has happened only with 2 generations. I mean, Tim mentioned that the transition in Europe took about 2 centuries or sometimes even more, but things are changing much quicker in developing countries. I skip this. Next slide. Now, a point which is often debated and sometimes very confusing is whether negative population growth is desirable or not. As you know, the United Nations Population Division is making those projections, stabilization of the world population around 9.2 billion people in 2050, and they assume that at that point, most countries will adopt replacement fertility, so something very stable. Now, many countries, especially the most developed ones, have now below replacement fertility. If this becomes a universal pattern, this will lead ultimately to negative population growth. So I listed on the next slide a few arguments for and against negative population growth. On the left side, you have the arguments for, and if you can read them, you will see that they are mostly national concerns or private concerns. Military power was such a big deal in France in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, especially after the 1870 war against Germany, and which created this very populationist attitude for more than a century. Economic power, increasing GDP if increasing the GDP is the main target, of course, the more people you have, the higher will be your GDP, the bigger will be your market, and so on. You will have an endless supply of labor if you have a population growth. This seems to be good for the economy, but primarily for the employer interest because they can pay lower salaries. It's not necessarily the interest of the employees, of course. And again, to the Busserip argument that it induces innovation, and the more problems you have to solve, the more innovative you are. But we have seen that is happened only rarely in history. And it produces a younger population. We have seen all the pyramids earlier on. You have a nice pyramid with a very wide basis, so you have a lot of children in the streets and so on and so forth. Now, there's the issue that is behind this is the dependency ratio. Now, whether you have a high population of children and small population of elderly or the opposite is basically the same for your dependency ratio because you have to spend income on those who are not active. So it's a relatively weak argument in terms of economic growth, especially that the children have no capital, whereas the elderly can have accumulated capital during their working life. Now, the counter-arguments in favor of population decline, and they are more global type of argument. Well, of course, the environment will be better preserved. We have seen that the human race is extremely destructive to the environment, and of course, the lesser people on the earth, the better it will be. There are more fixed resources available per capita. I mean, it's true for land, for water, for air, for fossil fuels, for minerals, for fish, and so on and so forth. Now, a shorter supply of labor tends to lead to higher salaries, and when your population declines, the salaries tend to go up. I mean, there's been a very well documented in Europe after the Black Plague, which killed a third of the population. I mean, salaries went up dramatically within a few years. And cheaper price of land for land, which will give people better access to property and probably less conflicts also. I mean, the more population density, the more likely you have to have conflicts around either land or water. And it will give more space for wildlife. So let me conclude by giving you a summary of those few thoughts, and again, meant to be provocative in order to stimulate the discussion. Well, first of all, I think the changing attitude towards family limitation were enough to change the relationship between population and resources as compared to before industrialization and before Malthus, when Malthus was speaking. The global environment became a key issue, and again, that's the new. I mean, it started about 50 years ago, but this is what I call new by if we talk on long-term trends. And I think there is an urgent need to continue along those lines. I think we have a template here. If we want to avoid major conflicts, we have to continue to encourage limiting population, if not negative population growth. And the state and international organizations are more and more likely to play a role in this issue, and more the norms and attitudes are becoming global. And I think, again, there are less and less conflicts around those issues than as compared to 30 years ago. And there is more and more need to share both the cost and the benefits of development. All right, so I'm going to stop here by saying that we need space for everybody, for the plants, the animals, and the humans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallen, for these 7 questions and the critical questions and some answers that you have given. I'd like to first see a raise of hands. Who would like to intervene? And I will be so impolite as to give you numbers. So would you please be so kind to remember your number? I see number 1. I see number 2. Behind number 2, I see number 3. And I see number... Aha, there we're coming. Now we're in business. Number 4 is all the way in the back, the gentleman with the beard. And then we see the lady with the green shirt, number 5. And I saw the gentleman there, number 6. That's the first round. Let's keep it for that round. And what I would like you to do is please say your name and the background your organization or your background that you briefly have, and then ask, and this is going to be the tricky one, could you please ask 1 question per person? Yes, number 1.
I think that you can understand me.
No, you cannot be heard, so please speak in the mic.
Oh, sorry, guys. My name is Chris Gehring. I'm an ecologist with, let's say, a West African background, and I have one major point with both of you, that in ecology, you have 2 types of survival strategy. One is called the R strategy, which deals with situations of unpredictability, uncertainty, and the essence is mobility, call it Lampedusa, and a high number of small offspring, hoping and praying that some of them will get somewhere. The other one is the K strategy. Tropical rainforest fruit seeds are very heavy, they fall straight down, but because the young plant has to wait for ages till some of the others topple. Now, I'm 100% convinced that the glorified bonobos we are, the year of Darwin, that this whole